Today, I want to take a look at counterculture in the 1950s and 60s. And we've been taking a look at the rise of the Cold. And what we examined is the growing tensions between these two superpowers with the development of the atomic bomb. And both of them, as we examined, built stockpiles in the event of a first strike, that they would have enough bombs to be able to attack the other side. And this defense mechanism was called mutually assured destruction, meaning that if you destroy me, I'm going to destroy you as a result. And so the world made this kind of relative peace and stability based on this kind of tenuous non-verbal agreement that we're not going to bomb the other side for fear that they're going to destroy us as well. But there was this growing tension because we didn't know if the other side was actually going to attack first or not. And so we couldn't fight this direct war because of that. And so we fought other wars like proxy wars. We talked about Korea and Vietnam, and Russia had their problems with Afghanistan. We also found that the space race was kind of a quasi, an effect of the Cold War. And then there are also cultural wars, this build up, this kind of mindset that starts to shift. Last time we watched a clip from the Atomic Cafe, which you see on the right-hand side of the screen, which was just a collection of different 1950s propaganda pieces that were run in the United States that shows the evils of communism. And mainly what it argues, right, a lot of this propaganda that we see in the 1950s and beyond is that the cure to communism is more capitalism. And so we see that embrace during the 1950s and beyond. And so the ideas that we saw in the 1930s that focus on the common man and the good elements, where we see here with Jimmy Stewart, who is kind of running this smaller kind of building and loan institution, and he's fighting against the evil kind of big corporation bank in order to save the soul of his town, where the powerful rich people are portrayed as the enemy, and the good wholesome American is kind of middle class American is portrayed as the hero, right? Kind of the David and Goliath story. We see that start to shift a little bit, right? And we see similar ideas. I had you watch Citizen Kane. We see similar ideas with Citizen Kane, although he's not focusing on the common man with this particular film. He's talking about the problems of capitalism. Is loosely based on the readings talks about this, how it's based on the life of Hearst, who is a newspaper man who had tremendous amount of influence over the ideas, using his newspapers as propaganda to lead, to direct, to sway the hearts and minds of the American citizens, and became extremely powerful. And we see that with Charles Kane, where he starts to develop more and more power as a newspaper man. Or he's kind of has this wealth, and he invests that wealth into buying a newspaper, and then he starts to print just the news initially, right? But then he starts to say, I make the news, I make history, right? So he starts to be corrupted by the power that he has, and to a point where he then becomes so egocentric and self-driven that he isolates himself from the entire world, and he dies pretty much alone. So it mainly talks about the downfall, but the narrative is the cautions of capitalism, the cautions of having too much power. And so what we're going to see is that this culture starts to shift, right? Where we start focusing on the common man, the virtues, and some of the dangers of capitalism. When we see the rise of the Cold War, and this kind of dualistic mindset, this either or, you're either communist or you're capitalist, you're either good or you're evil, right? However we're framing that, we see the culture starts to shift accordingly. So we're going to take a look a little bit at that. I wanted to take a look at this quote here. This really does help to understand what happened in the 1950s, where this consumer republic was born, and this is happening simultaneously with the rise of the Cold War. Just reading through this quote. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, public officials were alarmed at the decline in consumer spending, and all called upon good Americans to buy consumer goods in order to revive the economy. And we've talked about that with the Great Depression, and people were overspending, and they had their credit was maxed out, and then they couldn't buy anymore, and so jobs started laying off. Companies started laying off people. So, massive unemployment started happening. So the idea during the 1930s is that the propaganda was we need to spend so we can keep this mechanism of industry going. Continuing on with a quote, this was the first connection between citizenship and consumerism. During World War II, the message was reversed. Sacrifice, save, and don't expect to spend on goods there. The government needed to spend the available money. After the war, the big fear of economists and government leaders was that Americans would not spend their higher wages they were earning. The government responded by subsidizing mortgages and encouraging the housing boom in the suburbs. Business responded with malls and other new shopping opportunities away from the cities. What Cohen calls the Consumer Republic was born with an ever-growing hold on the mindset of American life. And so I apologize for that. The typo in there actually kind of fits, kind of interestingly enough, it does kind of fit. But what we see with this is that the message of propaganda, right? During the 1930s, we needed people to buy things. During World War II in the 1940s, we needed people to not buy things because we needed to sacrifice and save for the war effort. And so then the messaging of the government was reversed, right? But then after World War II, the concern was that people are going to go back to not spending money, not investing in banks, and not stuffing their extra cash that they had by fighting the war, not being able to spend. They were just going to sit on it and save it, and so and that the fear is that then we're going to lapse back into a Great Depression again, and so the government then had to put out the messages that good Americans buy. And so we're going to see that development, right? The antidote for capitalism is, or the antidote for so we're going to see that the antidote for communism is capitalism. Taking a look, I wanted to continue with this mindset. Victor Lebo was an economist during the 1950s, and he says if you really want to develop a vibrant economy, this is what you do. And what I wanted to think about is, I mean, a lot of the issues that we deal with today in 2020s is that is stems from the 1950s and the aftermath of World War II. And let's take a look at his ideas and see whether they apply to us today. He says, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfactions, our ego satisfactions in consumption, right? So thinking about that, do you know anyone that builds their spiritual satisfaction or their ego on what they're able to buy, right? The labels, right? Whatever products they're buying or whatever car that they're driving, then they're able to build their self-esteem, their view of their self-worth on it. Continuing on, the measure of social status, of social acceptance, of prestige is now to be found in our consumptive patterns. The very meaning and significance of our lives today express in consumptive terms, meaning that the better you are able to buy things, the better you are able to be a better person. Right? The more you matter in society, the greater you are, right? And this is a tremendous shift, and this is the propaganda that's going to be pushed. The greater the pressure upon the individual to conform to safe and accepted social standards, the more does he tend to express his aspirations, his individuality in terms of what he wears, drives, eats, his home, his car, his pattern of food serving, his hobbies. And so stopping there just for a second, I want you to think about this, right? What's the application of these ideas, right? Do we really base our ego, our kind of view of ourselves based on our net worth, right? And some of you might say, well, no, that's kind of superficial. And my follow-up question to that is, when you're on campus, when we actually were on campus and you would meet someone new, what was the first question that you asked that person, right? Normally it's, what's your major? And what's your major seems like an innocuous question that kind of helps us to understand who that person is, what they're interested in, but it also tells us what they're going to do. It tells us kind of their future, their potential within net worth. And so if someone says, for instance, I am a theater major, that means one thing, right? Someone says I am pre-med or pre-law, that says something totally different, right? And so do we view people based on their economic potential, based on their economic worth, right? And what he's arguing is that this is how to, if you really want people to buy and shop, you're going to have to push this idea. And I want you to question whether we're still living under this kind of rubric here. Continuing on with the quote, these commodities and services must be offered to the consumer with a special urgency. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever increasing pace. We need to have people eat, drink, dress, ride, live with ever more complicated and therefore constantly more expensive consumption. And so what we need consumers. We need capitalism. Capitalism is going to stop us from launching back into the Great Depression. And to some extent, that's true. We need people. We need the mechanism of industry. We need jobs, right? In order to stop this depression, it needs to, we need people to go out there and we need industry to be thriving, right? However, right, we have to then think about the other side of that. What are the social implications of this? What kind of society are we living in when we're living in a society that mainly bases our view of others based on what they're wearing, based on what they're driving, or what kind of home that they have, or what kind of job that they have? Is that a superficial society, right? And so there's some, definite positives that can come from this, but there's also some pretty heavy negatives as well. And Andy Warhol is inspired by this to a certain extent. And so his pop art is a reflection of this mass-changing society in the 1950s and 60s, where the main value that we're focusing on is capitalism, on consumerism. And so he argues, and we've taken a look at this before, right? Art always reflects the values of the culture in which it was produced. And so we've talked about Picasso's Guernica and how that was a representation of the Basques in the 1930s and the death, the devastation, the fascist movement that was happening at the time. We've taken a look at Giacometti's The Walking Man, which is a reflection of understanding what's going on with the Holocaust and trying to grapple with those horrors, and taking a look at Jackson Pollock and Barnett Newman and Mark Rothko and the abstract expressionists and how they're trying to make sense of this new kind of emerging world in the post-World War II era, all reflecting their world. Andy Warhol is reflecting his world in the 1950s and 60s, and his world is mainly dominated by the idea of consumerism. The two quotes that I read to you is kind of the mindset of what's being pushed, right? The propaganda out there, and he's reflecting this. And so he creates this series of soup cans, and so the idea is that you're going into Walmart or whatever grocery store that's near you, and you walk down an aisle, and this is what you see, right? You go down the soup can aisle, and you just are kind of completely encased within a bunch of soup can options, all looking very similar, right? But then you kind of go out and you kind of pick out your whatever it is, your vegetable beef or your chicken noodle, whatever the case may be. You put it in your cart and you move on. But and again, that kind of, in some ways, much like Victor Lebo's quote that I just read to you, that kind of is a representation of our identity, right? That what does vegetable beef say about me, right? Or what is cream of asparagus, or whatever the case may be. Our ability to shop says something about what we are doing, right? Or if we're going out and we're buying something like Western Value or Great Value, if at Walmart, whatever the case may be, that says something different about us, right? And so how we're able to, what we buy is kind of shaping our identity, and he's reflecting that. And it's kind of an interesting commentary that he's making. And what's kind of interesting about this is he kind of mass produces them. So they all look quite similar, but in a sense, they're all just a little bit different at the same time. And so mass consumption, mass production is all part of American society, what we're valuing during the Cold War. And so he's reflecting that. And he suggests that it even, mass consumption is not just something that we buy at the store. It's something that we consume within our homes, within the media that we watch. Television was becoming prominent in the 1950s and the 1960s, and movies, right? The glitz and the glamour. And so we see these mass-produced images that are constantly kind of inundated with, that's shaping the way that we see the world, telling us to constantly shop and fill our lives with this happiness. And if we could just be this glitz and glamour, again, this is kind of far beyond the Norman Rockwell Common Man or the Frank Capra It's a Wonderful Life or Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Or even the Dorothea Lange, right, where we're valuing the common man. This is about valuing glitz and glamour and those that are famous and those that are the entertainers and those that are going to have the money, because that's what we are valuing. And so we see Marilyn Monroe here, who is replicated time and time again in order to demonstrate how often she's visible, how important she is. But again, there's a bit of a bite to this to a certain extent, right? It's the question that I have with Andy Warhol: is he celebrating consumerism, or is he criticizing it, right? As we think about the Campbell soup cans, in some ways he's celebrating that this is kind of, this is who we are, and hey, isn't it great that everyone can kind of buy the same Campbell soup can? But in some ways, he's kind of criticizing that that's kind of a superficial society. And the same here, right? Where Marilyn loses her identity. The person that people fall in love with on the movie screen is not actually who she is, right? She loses her name, her identity, Norma Jean, and she becomes this kind of ultra star character. And so we kind of love the images. We love these gods we kind of put up in these kind of false gods that we have in our society. And this is what we value, right? And it makes a similar argument here with Barillo soap paths. And what he does here is he constructs these boxes and then he paints them to look indistinguishable between the Barillo paths that you'd buy at the store and the art that's before you, right? And he's suggesting that this is what we value, that consumerism has become our religion, that what we buy has become our gods, or what we consume in the store has become our gods. And so I want you again to question whether he's celebrating our love of consumerism or is he commenting on it. Thinking about this, right, the consumer culture and the American dream, I want you to think about what percentage of U.S. citizens plan to be millionaires someday, right? In college campuses, this percentage is probably a little bit higher than most. But with the idea of the American dream, that anyone who has hard work and determination, there's opportunity out there, and it kind of can be anyone's. Anyone can have it. We have this idea, right? That's the propaganda, that anyone can do it. And so let's take a look at the statistics of this. 62% of Americans believe that they're going to be millionaires someday, right? Let's take a look at the hardcore statistics, right? Or what percentage of the U.S. citizens are actually millionaires? 3%. And so if 62% believe that they're going to be part of that 3%, we have a bit of a problem, right? And that's part of the difference between propaganda and reality, right? The dream of, this illusion that we're all able to kind of reach and aspire to, and the hardcore reality, the hardcore statistics, is everyone believes that they're going to be in that 3%. Problem is there's probably not going to be a lot of room, right? And so it's kind of an interesting duality. And we've kind of taken a look a little bit at this when we've talked about Inception at the very beginning of the class, where most people in their kind of world were in this kind of dream world, and it's only a few people that kind of move beyond and to see the world for what it is. And that's what propaganda is, right? It's creating this dream world for us. It's telling us this kind of mythical alternate version of reality rather than giving us the hard statistics, right? And then thinking about this within the billionaires, right? What's the percentage of being a billionaire, right? 1 out of 538,000 U.S. citizens are billionaires, right? There's only 607 total billionaires in the U.S. And so everyone thinks that they're going to strike it rich. But the reality is it's going to be a little bit harder than that, right? The propaganda is that is open for everybody. The reality is that there's only a select few that can make it, that will be able to rise above those circumstances for whatever reason, right? Lack of opportunity, lack of education, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of reasons for it. But just statistically, it's pretty improbable. You almost have the same chance of being struck by lightning as you do becoming a billionaire, right? So, as we think about this, I want you to think about a life without cause is a life without effect. If we're just focusing on kind of this mythical, dream world of becoming a billionaire, so that we can then, right, getting back to the Victor Lebo quote that we're basing our self-esteem on what we can buy, what we can consume. If we're basing our identity on this kind of illusion of reality, then we're perhaps living a life that's an illusion and a lie, right? So we have to think about that. And I know this is one of the harder lectures that I give throughout the semester, because it really cuts to the core of what the propaganda tells us, right? It's suggesting that it's a little bit more, quite a bit more complicated than it really is. I wanted to shift gears just for a second here to also talk about another event that's happening in the 1950s that helps to shape our mindset, shapes American culture for the next several decades, even into to 2020. And it doesn't seem like this should have anything to do with culture, but it has a tremendous impact on culture. And what you see is the development of the interstate system. And what happened was it was Eisenhower. Who becomes the five-star general that's leading the war against the Nazis in Europe. But what happens is way back in 1919, he was tasked from going to New York to California, and it took him 62 days to get from here to here with his group of troops that he did. And several of the times they got stuck in the mud, and they had to require oxen to get them out through the mud on their journey. But as Eisenhower then, as he leads the United States and the West, the Allies, to victory, he then comes back home, is extremely popular, elected president twice, and as he becomes president, and he's thinking about, this Cold War. We've talked about Truman and how he says that every day kind of he's overshadowed by the Cold War. Once he leaves office, Eisenhower gets elected. And now, this former five-star general is thinking about the Cold War and national defense. And his mindset is that if Soviet Union attacks us on the West, right, and all of our troops are mobilized on the East, 62 days is a long time to get there. And so what he says is, militarily, strategically, we need to develop a system, an interstate system, that can get us from one place to another in a matter of a few days rather than a matter of 2 months. And so, and also as he was in, fighting the Nazis in Germany, he was also, had access to the German highway system, the Autobahn, and he was just impressed by how easy it was to get anywhere. And so he says, I need to do something like that in the United States. And so he develops an interstate system in order to in his mind, for national security, for national defense. And so he spends $128 billion in the 1950s developing the interstates that we have, which is 42,000 miles of road. And so here we see that the massive development of the interstate all over the country. And you can, as you kind of take a look at the interstate map, you can tell that the East Coast definitely has a lot more interstates than the West Coast. I mean, poor Utah and Idaho kind of get the shaft here. They only have Utah only has 80 and 15. I think 70 does kind of go through here a little bit further south. It's not shown on this map. But anyway, it's definitely the West gets kind of the shaft out than the East. But the idea again is for self-defense. And in fact, if you notice, right, the overpasses on the interstate. Next time you drive on the interstate, I want you to notice the overpasses. He actually wrote into the part of the strategy that the overpasses need to be a certain distance away from one another. And the idea for that was if the Soviet Union ever did attack, one of the first places that they're going to attack are our airports. What that will do is they'll make sure that we can't take off or land, our planes can't take off or land, and that makes us a lot more vulnerable, and it makes it easier for us to be invaded. And so what his argument is if they ever do bomb us and bomb our airports, we can turn the interstates into these kind of quasi runways. And so that is, again, another means of national defense. And so the overpasses is one way, right? So planes can take off and land within a certain amount of distance. And generally, most interstates have a certain amount of distance between going, one direction or the other direction. So that median is also part of it to help out with the national defense. I want to talk about the cultural impact of this just for a moment. The towns and how this shapes towns. So what you see and this one is by Bruegel in the 17th century, and what he's representing is kind of the common everyday town where you have people that are down here. This one, the reason why I chose this one is it reminds me of Rexburg in the winter. You just have a lot of people out kind of in the freezing cold. But here you have people kind of out enjoying, the pond that's frozen over on the ice, and you have hunters here that are going out and to hunt, and there's people over here, this blacksmith who's kind of working in the day. And what we see is generally the old version of the town is that everything is kind of centered within a close proximity. You have a church, you have schools, you have housing, all centered around the same kind of small walking distance. What happens in the 1950s is this all changes. You have, rather than the downtown areas becoming vibrant, you have the downtown areas starting to die off. And so all of the shops that used to be downtown within walking distance now all go, and you can notice this in your own town, out to the exits of the interstates because that's where traffic is, that's where business is. And so you have people that are kind of leaving the downtown area, and so the downtown areas mainly have become kind of they've become kind of deserts in some ways of life. There's not a lot of shops down there. Most of the time they're occupied by sometimes dental office, but a lot of times lawyer offices or accounting firms. Some towns are trying to bring back that life after decades of not having anything. Some towns might have a bit of a renaissance and they're trying to make a better effort. But most towns are going to focus on these big box stores like Best Buy or Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever the case may be, Walmart. That are coming to the downtown areas, or sorry, coming to the exits instead. And Rexburg is, kind of, it has that function of a smaller town area where you can walk to the university or walk to the downtown area. But even Rexburg has this to effect. When they built the new Walmart, they built it right next to the interstate. When they built the new high school, they built it on right on the other exit, right? And so most of the schools, most of the shopping are going to be away from the central core of the downtown area, and we have more of a car culture that's starting to develop. And another effect in the 1950s, as all part of this, are the suburbs, the rise of the suburb culture. And Levittown was kind of the pinnacle of this. Levittown was Levitt was a builder. He was in the war as the part of the war effort as kind of a builder in the war, and then he takes his kind of construction mindset after the war, and he takes a look at what people are looking for when they come home from World War II. And the number one thing that people want is a house, because before they left, they were in the Great Depression. They didn't have cash. Most of the young couples were living with their parents and couldn't afford their own place, and so now they have excess cash. The wife has been working in the factories while the man has been gone, and the man has been being a soldier. Both of them have excess cash, and the number one thing that they want to buy is a house. But everyone kind of gets back to this idea of the American dream. Everyone wants that house with a white picket fence, and so Levitt is the builder, kind of a genius builder. He says, "Hey, I'm going to give people what they want," and so he built 5 million new homes, and it was an average of 36 houses per day. And he did an assembly line. I wanted to show you a clip of this assembly line and some of the kind of the cool elements of it and some of the darker sides as well. We got to take a look at both sides, and if we want to kind of understand the complexity. And then he sold them for about under $7,000, which, if you factor in inflation, that would be about $73,000 in 2018. So thinking about that today, if you can buy a brand new home for $73,000, jump on it, because that is unheard of. And so it gives people this sense of the American dream, right? It fits into this idea of consumerism. We all want to be consumers because that's what makes a good American. We all want to have that white picket fence. We want that American dream, and it all kind of fits into this. And this is going to start to shape culture and society. And I'm going to talk about that. But I want to show you the clip that shows the Levitt towns.
In the first year of peace, more than 2 million couples were married. By 1950, 21 million babies had been born in a seemingly endless baby boom.
I came out of service out of the Navy in '46, and I wanted to go and marry a girl that was writing the 3 letters a week to me for 4 years. And she lived in Floral Park. I had a tavern here. And I moved in with the family. There was a mother and father, her sister and brother, and myself, and a baby coming on after a year.
Despite weeks and months of house hunting, some 3 million married couples throughout the country today are still unable to establish homes of their own.
When you look at the books that you read in school, you read of people in a house. You never read of people living in an apartment, which we did, in trees. It sounds, and it's all new. You know, it was really something that you would like to have.
Guess I don't have to tell you, Mrs. Blandings, what a woman's touch could do to a place like this. Yes, sir. A couple coats of paint, little pointing up here and there.
Of course, we wanted our own house, and after what, 2 years, 2 years in furnished rooms, and you could see some of the dumps we lived in. It was really, remember that attic room in Jamaica? Yeah.
I gotta have a home.
No one is to blame. Everyone is to blame. There's been a lag in home construction for more than 15 years.
In 1945, Americans needed 5 million new low-cost homes, and they needed them right away.
Now there are buildings
Of home ownership would soon be realized by a man about to fulfill a dream of his own and invent a new phenomenon, suburbia.
Bill Levitt, as a young man working with the Seabees in World War II, has this brilliant idea, taking some of the techniques he's seeing right then and there in World War II, building airstrips, putting up housing for GIs, and bringing them back to America for ordinary people. He's sitting there at night with his pals in the Pacific in World War II, saying, what do you want when you get home? Well, I want a house and a car.
Bill Levitt's special genius was figuring out how to mass produce the American dream.
We first came to see that property where they were going to build. It was potato farms, and it stretched like from here to eternity. You would see concrete foundations, nothing but concrete with the heat in. And then down the road there, where in the midst of all the dust, was a frame job going on. And then down on the dust was where he completed, was the sheathing going. And then down the road a bit, and it was like putting your clothes on, from your socks on first, and then putting your underwear on and the shirt, and finally way down on the other end
Was a finished
was a
product.
finished house. And yet you could see how it grew.
Before the war, the average contractor built 5 houses a year. In Levittown, Long Island, they built 36 houses a day, a grand total of 17,450. Designed for a family of 4, Levitt's basic Cape Cod sold for a minimum down payment at a price most people could afford.
I think there's a great ad in there. Mr. Veteran, you're a lucky guy. You can buy this house with $100 down. The first day that they were going to sell them, the lines were, people started lining up 72 hours before the houses went on sale. Even Levitt was stunned.
A second Levittown in Pennsylvania was every bit as successful as the Long Island Levittown. Everyone, it seemed, wanted a Bill Levitt home.
I beg your pardon, sir. Would you mind telling me who you are and where you're from?
I'm Dick Full from Atlantic City, New Jersey.
And would you tell me why you're moving here to Levittown?
Well, I'm working in this area now, and I've looked the houses over, and I think it's a fine place to raise a family, so I've decided to buy one.
Very good, sir.
My house was a little Cape Cod cottage with a trellis over the door and one window on either side. And it was 4 rooms, nice kitchen, eating kitchen, decent-sized living room, 2 small bedrooms, and a bathroom, and it had doors that I could close and open, which we had always lived in furnished rooms. We had no privacy whatsoever, nothing. It was perfect for a young couple.
And we had appendix in the kitchen.
That's right, the mixed washing machine in the kitchen. First time I ever saw a washing machine, I think.
And we fell in love because that washing machine was underneath the stairs, you know. And before that, when we had the baby, you know, it was like 16, 17 diapers a day to wash, boil them on the stove. And needless to say, the family wanted to get rid of us too. They didn't need a baby that was crying in tight quarters. You know, and to have a house of your own. Man, that was the way we felt.
After the Depression, all this come on, so it was kind of a gift from heaven, you know. You found these wonderful houses to move in.
And the best thing about it, I guess, was our independence. It was the first time we were away from our parents, completely independent. We did what we wanted when we wanted, like any kids. They wanted to be on their own, and we were.
Start our family.
That's right. And the rapport between neighbors at first was very good. Excellent, in fact.
Because they were all in the same boat as us. They were all first starting out, mostly young like us, and just starting with their family and their first house, too.
The new middle-class families of Levittown had one other thing in common. They were all white.
I walked up to the salesperson and I said to him, "We're very interested in your house and we'd like an application." And I remember what he said to me. He looked at me, he said, "It's not me, but the management has not as yet decided whether he's going to sell these houses to Negroes or not." And,
I can't believe it. You really thought you had it made. Everything is falling into place.
well, I'd like you to conceive that somebody telling you that there's no recourse, telling you that openly and outright like that.
Bill Levitt saw himself as a home builder, not as a social engineer, and he refused to sell the box. There were court cases against him, and the fact is he was all too typical of what existed in real estate in America in those days, and so in believing that you did not have to and should not have to sell to people who were not white.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is William Levitt, who heads the largest home building firm in the world.
Bill Levitt would become one of the richest men in America by providing architectural, not racial, equality.
Unlike anything we ever encountered before. This is one of 4 models which are now being built throughout Levittown. The 4 models vary slightly in overall design, but each has the same number of rooms. 2 bedrooms.
I think it was that sense that Americans really did like the comfort of having what the other guy had, but yet they could put a little fence around it and say, "This is mine." And that's really a particular American genius, is to say, "This is yours, this is mine, but we're still all the same."
Did you get all your dreams yet? It's just the first one.
An army of Levitt imitators carried the housing revolution across the country.
Thank goodness that's
By 1955, 3 out of every 4 houses built were built in Levitt-style subdivisions.
I think Levittown represented to a lot of city dwellers a dream that had eluded them all through the Depression and the war, which was to have a place somewhere with a patch of green in the back their kids were going to be able to live better than they did. And to that extent, it fulfilled that particular vision. To another whole group of us growing up in cities, Levittown was a surrender. You know, that was exactly what we didn't want to be. To us, going to Levittown would be like going to Attica.
Its critics said that Levittown was little more than a voluntary prison, a multitude of uniform houses lined up at uniform distances on uniform roads in a treeless waste. What the critics said did not matter to the homeowners of Levittown. They had built sturdy new lives in sturdy new houses and wrapped their newborn into the nest. What worried many Americans was not the conformity of their own lives, but communist Russia.
So a couple of ideas to just kind of bring these ideas together and to a close is first the idea of the suburbs was mainly brought upon by the idea that people wanted to live close enough to the city to have all of the benefits of going to the movies, going to the theater, going to the art shows, have all the cultural elements of the city, but none of the negative consequences of the city, like some of the crime and the violence that happens often within cities. And so the suburbs was a nice way for them to be close enough, but yet not quite close. And that's where the interstate system helps as being able to make the commute to where they work in the cities easy, and so then they can go home away from the cities. Another element is that we see within this particular clip is the idea of the American dream. And so we see that all these people that lived through the Great Depression, lived through the hardships, and not knowing if they were ever going to have a place of their own or have all of the latest gadgets like a washing machine. That was a big deal to a lot of them. Now being able to, for the first time after the war, being able to feel as though they've made it, feel as though they have a patch of grass for themselves, and be able to make the lives of their children better than their own. But what we also see, some of the negative aspects of it, is this sense of homogeny, this idea that everyone's kind of feels the same, therefore they have to look the same and have to be the same. And so we're going to see, in the next lecture, we're going to take a look at counterculture and the reaction to this. And another element that's kind of prevents the darker side of Levittown as the suburbs is the racial discrimination that became inherent with everyone feeling as though they have to be the same and look the same, this idea of sameness. Anyone who's different is not accepted, and we certainly see that within the particular clip with the African Americans couple that were going to try to buy a home, and they weren't able to. The rampant discrimination, and it just shows, some of the continuing elements, the systemic elements of racism that the United States continues to struggle with. And this idea of having to be the same or look a certain way is part of that imagery.